The Sierra Club was formed in 1892, so we've been in operation for 120 years, by a visionary of his day, John Muir. We were the first ever citizens environmental group in the United States and, to my knowledge, in the world. Our initial purpose was to protect the wild places of the United States, starting with the mountains. And then toward the middle of the 20th century, we gradually changed our focus to pollution and preventing pollution. And now in the last 10 years or so, we've begun to reorient once again to focus on climate change and global warming.
Presumably because you were getting out to these wilderness areas and seeing the effects of climate change, were you, in some of the places you were getting to?
The Sierra Club's DNA is in wild places, in mountains and canyons and rivers. Over our 120 years, we've begun to evolve somewhat, so we now have a lot of members and staff who are mostly concerned with just preventing pollution and preventing climate change.
Right, and you said in the last 10 years you got much more involved in the climate change issue. What specifically have you been involved in or have you been campaigning against?
The prime focus of our climate change work has involved coal-fired electricity. When President George Bush decided in 2001 that the United States needed 150 new coal-fired power plants, we set on a campaign to defeat that. And we're very proud of our success. We've actually stopped 147 of those 150 plants from being built. And since then, of course, another 15 or so have been proposed, and we've stopped almost all of those. So we're claiming a success rate of about 96%.
Right, so less coal-fired power stations. What is the alternative as far as you're concerned? And we've seen that recently the US government has been talking about fracking as a possible alternative to coal power. Would you go along with that?
Well, we have a priority of preferences as an alternative, and we begin with conservation and efficiency. We'd like to use less power, and we think we can do a lot of that. Secondly, we would go to renewable energy sources, obviously wind and solar. And given the recent dramatic reductions in the cost of solar power, we think that's now sort of cost competitive with coal. But obviously what's happened in the real world is the cost of natural gas production has dropped dramatically with this new fracking technology. And so the introduction of very inexpensive gas has worked a very profound change in the electricity market and pushed out coal for the most part.
You were saying a while ago you were undecided about the benefits or otherwise of fracking or the environmental damage being caused by fracking. Where does the Sierra Club stand now on that issue?
Well, before the advent of this hydrofracking technology, we saw gas as a preferable fuel to coal and a way to bridge a transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable energy economy. Fracking, though, has raised Pandora's box in terms of other environmental ills, not only the harm to groundwater, damage that's done to communities, to forests, to wildlife resources, but also the possibility of dramatic leaks of methane and consequential global warming footprint comparable perhaps to coal. So we are now devoting substantial resources to try and reform fracking so that gas can become a reasonable fossil fuel over the short term.
I mean, outside of the United States, we hear a lot about the US government, previous President George Bush's attitude towards climate change, possible changes in the current administration. But we don't often hear a great deal about what people on the ground, people who get out into the wilderness areas, the general attitude towards climate change. I mean, what do you find, as a director of the Sierra Club, what do you find when you talk to people on the ground about their attitudes towards the issue?
Well, we've always been connected to wild places and wildlife, and in that realm we see big changes taking place and likely to take place over the short term. We see habitat ranges moving to higher elevation, to more northern latitudes, and we also see climatic changes, increases in rainfall in some places and drought and elsewhere with enormous adverse effects on habitat. So we experienced that first on, and that remains one of our big priorities, is to try and help wild places and wildlife adapt to the inevitable onslaught of climate change.
Right. And here in Doha, what do you hope to achieve here? What is the purpose of being in Doha? You know, are you interacting? Are you talking to other organisations? Do you have a message? You know, you can bring here to other organisations.
Yeah, we have about 16 people here actually, and we're bringing a couple messages. One is that people need to understand that we've had great success in the United States in defeating coal-fired power. It's almost to the point where it's not being used for new power plant construction. And that path makes sense for other countries. So we're trying to share our experience there. Secondly, we have people who are involved in the NGO community that's adjunct to the negotiations. And so we're supporting all the NGOs in the areas such as technology transfer and CDM reform and those kind of areas.